Chapter 410. The weather is quite nice today. I heard you trained late into the night yesterday. Did you rest well? Theodore Fontaine, the commander of the Imperial Knights, had looked indifferently at Pruel, who sat before him, smiling faintly. He had let Pruel into his office without a second thought, as it was rest time, and there was no particular reason for his sudden visit. We were never the kind to meet and exchange pleasantries. I will have to go out to observe training soon, so could you please get to the point? You know that I was in Tenno until recently. Why do you think I went there? I told you to get to the point. I don't like riddles. I went there to find a way to stop my father, and I found it. Theodore's eyes had narrowed slightly at Pruel's response. I thought you went to meet Baron Wilhelm, but was it Duke Paleta? I think you know that the distrust towards my father within the family is growing. I won't deny that I considered it a problem unrelated to me until now, but not anymore. After finishing his words, Pruel had maintained silence just long enough to let out a breath. Creating the right atmosphere was essential when conveying something important. Do you know about my father's ongoing investment in the Western trade business? ... You seem to know to some extent. Then, do you also know about the charity party and auction that will soon be held in the Tenno under Baron Wilhelm's leadership? ... Do you know that those in the Sun Palace have already grasped this fact? Theodore's eyes, which had been narrowing little by little, had hesitated for the first time. As Pruel's eyes softened, Theodore, who had been looking at him like a pebble on the roadside, had changed his posture and sat up straight. What do you think is the reason why the cavalry and Duke Paleta are still there? I saw too much in Tenno, and I'm convinced that my father has crossed the line. There was a lot implied in the phrase cross the line, and Theodore had understood all of it. Don't forget that the tragedy of the Apito family was just a few months ago. If you try to bury it and leave my father alone knowing this, the result will be no different from Apito. No, a storm greater than that will engulf everyone. His voice had sounded calm, but all the more chilling, like a warning. Theodore had kept silent and then quietly asked, if what you say is true, and His Majesty knows everything, you don't think I would report this to the Duke? It would already be too late when you report, and I also know that you won't. How? To the sharply uttered question, Pruel had twisted the corner of his lips without a sound. Because you know that for you, the sword is more important than family or father, and the Imperial Knights are more important than anything. Theodore Fontaine had closed his mouth. He had felt a slight surprise at the fact that the young prince, who he had never shown interest in, had suddenly stood before him with such a face. I met many people in the family after returning to the capital. Meeting with you today was in fact the last in the line after all the other meetings we are done. Pruel slowly recited the names of those he had met over time. Among them were names of those who had suddenly been robbed of the rights they had originally possessed due to the order of the Duke of Tain, but most of them were people who, like Theodore, had taken a relatively indifferent attitude to the affairs of their family. Even though they knew the Duke of Tain was overly involved in trade investments, there were also people who thought it didn't matter as long as their own business was not affected, even if the southern merchants were outraged that their rights were being encroached upon. Did everyone agree with your opinion? Most agree that the family must be maintained well in order for us to enjoy and protect what is precious to us. Isn't it the best time to think again whether a leader who misuses the family's power without fulfilling their responsibilities is really needed by us? Theodoro, who had inherited the blood of the Taine family more deeply than anyone else, could not argue with that statement. The reason he had somewhat reluctantly followed the Duke of Taine's requests or complied with them thus far was because he recognized that he needed to fulfill at least a minimal duty and responsibility to help the head of the family to maintain it. However, if the Duke of Taine had crossed the line without his knowledge, it had turned into a problem that could not be ignored as before. According to Pruell, it was because of the things he wanted to protect. What was the reason the once proud Apeto ducal house had closed its doors in disgrace and entered financial rehabilitation in the blink of an eye? It was because they could no longer hide their unfavorable sins that had been committed within the family for a long time. So, how had those sins been exposed to the world? It was undoubtedly deeply involved with the silent will of the emperor and the hand of the Duke of Paleta who had carried it out. They, who had seemed to have no power left after the crown prince's appointment, had moved a character within the Apeto family who had never been considered important, the third son, and finished everything in the blink of an eye. The corrected Duke Apeto was lying down, waiting for death, and his lost position has passed to the ailing first son. As if he knew exactly what Theodoro was thinking, Pruell smiled cunningly beyond his blood-red eyes. Even if it's not me, His Majesty the Emperor will soon put you at the crossroads of choice. Ignorance won't be an excuse, but if you take my hand now, I will tell you everything I have seen and heard there. Theodoro recalled the conversation he had with the Duke of Taine. The Duke had shown no particular reaction to the news that his son Pruell had suddenly gone to Tainu, considering it less important than his trade business. But perhaps Pruell had calculated even that, making contact with Duke Paleta, who was like the Emperor's aide, collecting all the evidence against the Duke of Taine. Victory's confidence, never seen before, was read in his confident attitude. Since when he had the child started making contact with the Emperor's side, many thoughts flowed through Theodoro's head in an instant. He guessed that the meeting in Tainu was not the first time. When did His Majesty, the Emperor, and Duke Paleta started watching the Taine family and the Duke? Foolishly thinking that the Emperor, through the Western monster subjugation, was merely trying to empower the cavalry, Pruell clearly told Theodoro that his father too could follow the path of Duke Apeto. Unlike the imperial knights of long ago, who moved like the emperor's limbs and devoted their lives to serving the imperial family, the current imperial knights was a distortion, with their average ability degraded. They no longer wholeheartedly devoted their bodies and minds to the emperor and the imperial family. That role had long been handed over to the other groups. But Theodoro had experience helping and learning the sword under the same master as the imperial princess in his childhood. He was one of those who knew best how sharp the emperor's teeth and claws truly were, residing in the Sun Palace, how talented his brother, Duke Paleta, was with the sword, and that he was someone never to be taken lightly. And he knew well that it was precisely for that reason he had been appointed as the commander of the Imperial Knights. Even though I thought I knew, I didn't realize until the sword tip was right before my eyes. Who could have foreseen that a slight annoyance caused by the greed of Duke Taine in the trading business could come back like this, snowballing into something more significant? Theodoro stared quietly at Pruell, who was looking at him with a short smile like a sword, and opened his mouth. Fine, let's cooperate. You have made a wise decision. So, what are you going to do after you get me? Will you become the next Duke of Taine? No. Pruell's face was unflappably calm as he answered shortly. The next Duke of Taine will be Priscilla. I will not take that position. Then? At that question, strangely, Pruell's tensed, filled smile softened slightly for the first time. I will go somewhere else, to a place where I can safely protect what I want to protect. It was an incomprehensible statement, but Theodoro decided not to think too deeply about it. After all, what mattered now was what had to be done next. He rose from his seat and looked down at Ruel with indifferent eyes. All right, tell me what I need to do from now on. Either spotted the security forces not far away and put more strength into his wind-stepping movement. Either Ever, who was standing by the open window, called his name and beckoned him.